This is not something that a decent human being could.
Meghan Markle may have believed one carefully crafted legal warning would finally bury this controversy for good. But if the whispers circulating behind closed doors are even remotely true, that strategy may have achieved precisely the opposite. Because Martha Stewart allegedly refused to retreat, refused to panic, and definitely refused to apologize. Instead, she reportedly answered with a response so icy, so dismissive, and so unapologetically confident that what started as a few sharp remarks about Meghan's lifestyle ambitions is suddenly being discussed like a full-blown celebrity showdown, with lawyers allegedly hovering nearby and neither woman seemingly willing to blink first. And this is where everything gets seriously messy. Because Martha Stewart is hardly some nervous newcomer who vanishes the moment attorneys get mentioned. She is a woman who has endured decades of brutal headlines, public humiliation, business battles, prison, reinvention, and criticism from virtually every direction imaginable. So believing a warning from Meghan's camp would suddenly frighten her into silence was always going to be a very risky gamble. And that alone could turn a quiet disagreement into a headline machine almost overnight. The drama began because Martha did something Meghan's critics believe almost nobody inside celebrity circles dares to do anymore. She spoke casually, confidently, and without seeming especially impressed by the polished image surrounding Meghan's attempt to enter the lifestyle industry. Martha's original remarks were not delivered like some screaming personal attack, which arguably made them sting even more. Because while discussing the unusual journey from actress to princess to television homemaking personality, she essentially questioned whether the entire progression actually made sense. Suddenly, the woman trying to build a lifestyle empire found herself publicly evaluated by the woman who practically created the modern blueprint for one. There was no dramatic shouting match, no public confrontation, and no obvious insult that could easily be dismissed as jealousy. There was simply Martha, sounding unconvinced. And sometimes, that can hurt far more than open hostility. Supposedly, that was where Meghan's frustration started simmering, because the criticism arrived at arguably the worst possible moment. Meghan has been trying to reshape the public conversation around herself, moving away from endless royal feuds and toward business, cooking, entertaining products, domestic branding, and a carefully curated image of someone who wants audiences to view her as more than a former working royal. But when Martha Stewart publicly questions whether that transition feels authentic, the criticism carries an entirely different weight. Martha has spent decades establishing authority in precisely that world. And according to the original controversy, she reportedly emphasized that authenticity and genuinely knowing your subject matter mattered enormously. It was not technically an accusation, but the implication was obvious enough for critics to seize it and run. Then came the dinner party story, and this is where the situation supposedly stopped being awkward and started becoming genuinely dangerous for Meghan's public image. Martha allegedly recalled attending a California dinner where Meghan was also present after a UK trip, and the account that followed suggested Meghan had discussed matters connected with that visit, including royal-related conversations. Meghan's side strongly disputed that version, insisting the conversation was nowhere near as revealing as critics claimed, and that the European trip had only been mentioned in broad, harmless terms. Suddenly, what might have remained a passing celebrity anecdote became a full-blown credibility question. Who actually remembered the dinner correctly? Who was exaggerating? And why was such an enormous effort apparently being made to publicly correct Martha? That pushback already transformed the story into a much bigger spectacle. But the newest alleged twist takes the tension somewhere far more explosive. According to the latest version of this storyline, Meghan's representatives supposedly escalated matters privately after watching the controversy stubbornly refuse to disappear, allegedly sending Martha a formal warning demanding she stop repeating claims Meghan's camp considered inaccurate and potentially damaging. Now, notice the word allegedly, because there is no verified public document proving such a warning exists in this scenario. But as a gossip development, this is exactly where the feud would transform from snark into warfare. A celebrity dispute can survive insults. It can survive shady interviews. But the moment lawyers are even rumored to enter the room, everyone starts asking the same question. What exactly is somebody afraid will be said next? And Martha's alleged response? That's where things supposedly went nuclear. Instead of offering some carefully negotiated clarification, Martha is rumored in this fictionalized update to have stood firmly by her right to describe what she remembered and made it clear through people around her that she had no intention of being intimidated into rewriting her own recollection. Imagine the calculation behind that response. Meghan's alleged warning would presumably be designed to contain the story, lower the temperature, and prevent fresh headlines. Yet Martha refusing to fold would instantly create a second scandal layered directly on top of the first. Now the conversation is no longer merely, "What did Meghan say at dinner?" It becomes, "Did Meghan actually try to silence Martha Stewart?" And that is precisely why the alleged legal move would be such an enormous PR risk. Because critics were already accusing Meghan's side of overreacting. In the original drama, the party host reportedly disputed Martha's version, which should theoretically have helped Meghan, but instead it gave the disagreement even more oxygen because headlines could now frame the situation as two competing versions of one private evening. Add an alleged legal warning on top of that, and suddenly Meghan's critics are practically handed a storyline on a silver platter. One casual Martha comment, one denial, one witness pulled into the public argument, and now supposedly attorneys getting involved. Every attempt to close the door seems to open three more. The timing would also be disastrous because Meghan's lifestyle ambitions depend heavily on credibility. She needs audiences buying into the idea that this new era is natural, authentic, polished, and sustainable, not another temporary identity wrapped around whatever opportunity currently looks attractive. Martha's comments attacked that exact vulnerability without even needing to become vicious. She essentially raised the question Meghan's critics have been asking for months. Can someone simply enter a fiercely competitive lifestyle space and expect established authority because celebrity already exists somewhere else? Meghan may have fame, connections, royal history, media attention, and instant headlines, but Martha has decades of experience attached directly to the category itself, making any fight between them deeply uneven. In one crucial way, Meghan risks looking defensive, while Martha can simply look experienced. And now the question hanging over everything is no longer whether Martha roasted Meghan. That already happened in the public imagination. The real question is what Martha does next if she genuinely believes someone tried to scare her into silence. Because Martha Stewart has spent an entire career proving that pressure does not necessarily make her retreat. Sometimes, it makes her dig in even harder. And if the alleged warning was meant to end this feud, Meghan may soon discover that sending it was actually the moment the real battle began. The biggest mistake in this entire spectacle may have been assuming that pushing back harder would somehow make the story disappear. Because once the response grew louder than the original criticism, the controversy stopped looking like a temporary celebrity disagreement and started looking like something far more revealing. The smartest move would have been silence, because the internet forgets quickly. Audiences move on, and even harsh criticism usually burns itself out when nobody keeps feeding it. But instead, the rebuttals continued. The explanations multiplied, and what should have vanished suddenly became impossible to ignore. That is exactly why the alleged legal warning development now feels so explosive. Because if the goal was protecting the reputation, the result may have been the complete opposite. The entire conversation is now revolving around defensiveness, credibility, and why so much energy would supposedly be spent challenging a woman whose original remarks might otherwise have disappeared within days. Martha Stewart never needed to create some enormous spectacle to make the criticism sting. The original point was already sitting there quietly and brutally because the question surrounding the transition from acting to royal life and then into the lifestyle world landed directly on the brand's biggest vulnerability. The comparison was uncomfortable precisely because Martha Stewart had spent decades building expertise in that arena while the newer lifestyle push was still struggling to prove itself. That contrast became even sharper when the discussion turned toward authenticity and knowledge, because those words landed harder than any obvious insult. The implication was that success in this world required more than visibility, expensive presentation, celebrity connections, or beautifully packaged products. It required trust, expertise, consistency, and the kind of authority that cannot simply be declared into existence. And then came the question critics refused to abandon. If the dinner party account was completely wrong, why did the pushback become so aggressive? Why did a passing recollection become something requiring witnesses, statements, corrections, and now, in this fictionalized continuation, an alleged legal warning? That is where the story became far bigger than the original comment. Martha Stewart had nothing obvious to gain from turning one dinner into a prolonged public war, and that alone gave critics another reason to question why the response became so intense. The more people argued over whether the account was accurate, the more attention returned to the private conversation itself, and suddenly everyone was examining the smallest details instead of moving forward. So now the entire story ends with a question refusing to disappear. Was this simply an ordinary disagreement that became unnecessarily huge because everyone kept responding? Or did